the question then arises, okay, like how can we at all make systematic progress towards understanding the future of AI systems where we do not have empirical access? We still want to make progress somehow. And ideally, we want that progress to be systematic and not just, getting lucky. You should always be suspicious of the analogies and proxies you use. But if you use a bunch of them and they sort of like converge or sort of agree on some aspect, you should be more confident about those aspects. The sort of like pluralistic perspective and seeking for sort of like epistemic robustness through plural perspectives is what I'm after.
Hello, and welcome to the Cognitive Revolution, where we interview visionary researchers, entrepreneurs, and builders working on the frontier of artificial intelligence. Each week, we'll explore their revolutionary ideas, and together we'll build a picture of how AI technology will transform work, life, and society in the coming years. I'm Nathan Lebenz, joined by my co-host, Erik Torenberg.
Hello, and welcome back to the Cognitive Revolution. Recently, I had the honor of being invited by Jan Tallinn, leading AI investor and philanthropist, and former Cognitive Revolution guest, to serve as a recommender in the Survival and Flourishing Fund's Fall 2023 grant-making process. Over the course of 2 months, 5 other recommenders and I worked our way through roughly 150 grant applications. And yes, I did read every single one, conducting in-depth research and interviews with the groups that we considered most promising. And ultimately, we used a formal deliberation known as the S process to officially recommend grants to Jan and the fund's other donors. In the course of that project, I had the opportunity to meet the leaders of a number of AI safety-focused nonprofits. And now that the grant process is complete and the checks have been sent, I'm planning to invite a number of them on the show to talk about their various approaches to advancing our understanding of and preparedness for AI risks. Contrary to some recent conspiracy theories you might have seen online, I have found this space to be remarkably transparent, with funders regularly publishing their grants, and this was the case for the Survival and Flourishing Fund grant process, and also the grantees themselves often publishing their plans and status reports. So today, to kick off this series, and we will be weaving this in with other types of guests over the next month or two, my guest is Nora Ammann, co-founder and director of PIBBSS, a research initiative focused on the principles of intelligent behavior in biological and social systems. Regular listeners to the show will know that I often worry that most of us, myself included at times, are still thinking too small about AI. Because not only are the AI systems fast becoming more powerful, but we're also deploying them at a faster pace than any previous technology has ever been deployed. What this will ultimately entail, I, of course, don't know, but I do expect all kinds of surprises. And so with that in mind, I was excited to meet Nora and learn more about her work. She really impressed me as one of few people who is thinking appropriately big about the future of AI, while also maintaining an impressive level of epistemic humility and rigor. Her work, as you'll hear, is an attempt to create an entirely new and highly interdisciplinary approach to understanding the future of AI. And while she's still early in that process, and the research is fundamentally challenged by the fact that the AI systems of greatest interest don't yet exist, I'm certainly among those who believe that timelines to some form of transformative AI could end up being quite short. And thus, I consider her work to be both important and urgent. As always, if you're finding value in the show, I'd ask that you take a moment to share it with friends. This episode, in particular, I'd suggest sending to a brilliant friend currently working in a more mature field whose brainpower might be more valuable if they applied it to the study of AI. And with that, I hope you're inspired by this conversation about new angles on AI safety research with Nora Ammann of PIBBSS. Nora Ammann, co-founder and director of PIBBSS and research associate at the Alignment of Complex Systems Research Group at Charles University. Welcome to the Cognitive Revolution.
Thank you so much.
So I'm really excited to talk to you because I think you have a really unique and interesting perspective on all things AI safety and AI alignment. And, one of my big ideas, and honestly, the reason I do this show is because I think broadly, we as a society are not really ready for what is coming at us with the rapid development of AI systems. And I think we need a lot more people bringing their unique perspectives to the challenge of figuring out what is it that we are creating and, what is likely to happen as a result of all this. So, you have such a unique angle on that, and I want to kind of unpack it in depth. But hopefully, one of the things I hope we can accomplish here is to maybe inspire some people to think that, hey, I don't have necessarily a background in machine learning, but maybe I still actually could bring a useful perspective to this grand society-wide, defining challenge of our time of figuring out like what's up with AI. So hopefully, that we will, as we get into all the different angles, that you approach the problem from and all the work that you've done to start to bring people from various backgrounds into the study of AI, hopefully will inspire some others to come along. For starters, how about maybe just giving us a introduction to the way that you think about AI safety, AI alignment? Let's get the Nora take on this, framing question.
I think there exist quite a few different frames on like what AI risk is about, or maybe what AI safety and alignment is about. And I don't want to frame this as sort of like the right or authoritative way of thinking about it. I think it's actually productive to also play with different frames on this. But there is one way I like to think about it that is like sort of erring on the more like pragmatic or deflationary sense. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like in very simple terms, what's the main thing here? And then we can still build on, sophisticate our theory of what exactly is the worry. But like, yeah, in the most simple terms, I think the way I look at the space is something like, first, well, it seems like we are building these systems that just like become sort of increasingly powerful, increasingly capable, increasingly sophisticated in how they can act in like complex environments. So like that's the thing that seems to be going on, ChatGPT coming out, etc. And then I think on the other hand, there's like also like a tendency for these systems to like come to be in positions or come to be used in ways that like where they like make increasingly consequential decisions. And then as sort of a third premise here is like, we don't actually like in a very technical sense have not figured out how to like tell these systems to do anything we want reliably. We don't know how to do that. We like they do sometimes what we want but sometimes they don't do what we want. And I think the combination of these three things is really worrying. So like the more we sort of like automate big, important, critical decisions away to systems, we don't know how they act. We don't know how to like do things that we want reliably. That seems problematic. And I think that's sort of how I like look at AI risk at the very sort of like far away perspective. And then I think from there we can sort of dig more deeply into like, cool, like why in the first place is it hard to like get these systems to do what we want reliably? Like why is this hard and not easy? Like, yeah, why is this not easy? And then I think there you can get into like a much more fine-grained or like detailed sort of discussion about what are the reasons for this? Is this in fact the case? And then if so, what are the reasons for this? Which can maybe provide one frame towards like what are the obstacles to be overcome such that we could have AI systems that we can like trust in how they act or understand in how they act.
When people talk about AI safety, and unfortunately, I think the discourse around these topics is kind of growing coarser and more polarized at the moment in unfortunate ways. And one of the things that people often say is like, oh, you're just kind of making everything up. And, this is all super speculative and these systems don't even exist yet. And, therefore it's all fanciful and we shouldn't worry about it. And I think you have a great way of reframing that is both a lot more prudent in my mind, but also invites new and more productive ways of thinking about the problem. And that's your framing of epistemic access. So tell us how you frame this problem of thinking about, trying to get a handle on these systems that we haven't even invented yet.
Yeah, so the key idea here, and this is also sort of maybe the like main motivating sort of premise for like PIBBSS, like one of the projects I'm directing, it's just the idea that cool. So like we are like building increasingly advanced AI systems. Maybe in some important way, the systems we might be most worried about, like the systems we like least understand and also might be like most powerful, those systems don't necessarily exist yet, and or sort of like we maybe don't just want to do like trial and error to like figure out how they work because they, on the premise here, like would be like really powerful or like could potentially already have like a lot of like potentially harmful impact. And what this describes, I think, is like, what I call an epistemic access problem. And this refers basically to just like looking at what is the like normal typical way for like science to make progress in understanding. Like science in its core sort of like depends on empirical access to a phenomena in order to be able to falsify your hypothesis. Or in engineering, sort of the like, trial and error approach, you try something, it doesn't work. You try a slightly different thing, it still doesn't work. You try yet another thing and it works, right? That's kind of like, that's like in some sense the core of the machinery of our like collective societal sense-making, knowledge building machinery. And the premise here is that like with questions regarding the future of AI, we don't have access to sort of the basic gears of that machinery. But nevertheless, like we wanna understand something about what's gonna happen and how to like make what's gonna happen go well. The question then arises, okay, like how can we at all make systematic progress towards understanding the future of AI systems where we do not have empirical access? And then I think from there, sort of like that, having that as the problem statement, from there we can be like, well, cool, like we still want to make progress somehow, and ideally we want that progress to be systematic and not just getting lucky. And then I like think about maybe the like research space on that is like trying to tackle about these questions as like something we can divide up in different spaces depending on how they tackle that epistemic access problem.
So tell us how you categorize the approaches to this today. And I think you're, in a sense, creating your own like third way. But to kind of contrast your field building approach against those that have emerged already, why don't you start by telling us how you kind of conceptualize the approaches to trying to understand this AI future that others have been pursuing so far, and then you can tell us about the new paradigm that you're developing.
I mean, this is not the only way of thinking about or carving up the research space, but I think it's like one productive way. The idea is roughly, okay, so we have this epistemic access problem and different research or like epistemic approaches try to tackle this epistemic access problem in different ways. So for example, I think maybe the most prominent way that is like going on is what I would like roughly refer to just as like the most typical sort of like ML technical safety types of approach, where here the key assumption that goes into this epistemic approach is to say that the sort of systems we are most worried about, like the sort of future AI systems we are interested in, they will in important ways be similar to the state-of-the-art ML systems we have at the moment, such that understanding more about these state-of-the-art ML systems, understanding how they, like the ways in which they may be unsafe, understanding how to make them safe, all of these sort of insights, they will translate to these future systems we're interested in. So assumption being, in some important ways, state-of-the-art ML is similar to the future systems. Thus, our insights about current systems will translate to future systems. Another research approach that is also used makes another basic assumption. One I often talk about is mostly being about sort of trying to think about, okay, let's imagine sort of like an idealized rational agent. Let's assume that highly advanced AI systems will act pretty much like these idealized systems. You might argue for this either because you think the future advanced systems we are thinking of, they are just very powerful. So they're like just in practice will come very close to like acting like that, these idealized systems, or because you think this is just like a good way to get started. Like I think like idealizing is something that is like happening across the sciences, right? You start with like an idealized, like simplified model, and then you like maybe over time try to like nuance and make it more realistic. But like that can also be a productive epistemic approach. So I think that's like research directions that are often informed by like maybe formal epistemology, decision theory, rational actor models in economics, and then making arguments from this. So like a bunch of the sort of very classical discussion on AI risk in particular, where we're like talking about basic AI drives, something that Ammann introduced, I think in 2012, or like instrumental convergence, power-seeking arguments. These are often conceptual arguments that sort of like look at, okay, like an idealized or like going towards an idealized powerful agent, they would, see these constraints to like act in these ways, and like what risks does that propose, or again, what would it look like for these systems to be safe? So I think these are characterized as like two important like high level epistemic approaches.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Real quick, what's the easiest choice you can make? Taking the window instead of the middle seat, outsourcing business tasks that you absolutely hate. What about selling with Shopify? Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US, and Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Whether you're selling security systems or marketing memory modules, Shopify helps you sell everywhere, from their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. I've used it in the past at the companies I've founded, and when we launch merch here at Turpentine, Shopify will be our go-to. Shopify helps turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, up to 36% better compared to other leading commerce platforms. And Shopify helps you sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. With Shopify Magic, whip up captivating content that converts, from blog posts to product descriptions. Generate instant FAQ answers. Pick the perfect email send time. Plus, Shopify Magic is free for every Shopify seller. Businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/cognitive. Go to shopify.com/cognitive now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/cognitive.
Omniki uses generative AI to enable you to launch hundreds of thousands of ad iterations that actually work, customized across all platforms with a click of a button. I believe in Omniki so much that I invested in it, and I recommend you use it too. Use CogRev to get a 10% discount.
But obviously that's not all that one could do. So I guess another big, just brief commentary for me is that I always kind of keep coming back to this thought that we're all still thinking too small. And, there are certainly plenty of big thoughts to be found in both of these different approaches that you've described. But it does seem still like there's a lot out there, that is not captured by either kind of school of thought so far. For one thing, I'm always repeating too this mantra that neither the human brain nor the transformer are likely to be the end of history. And so, I don't know how different the AI systems of the next few years are likely to be as compared to what we have today. But I would be very surprised if it's, just a bigger transformer, that continues to drive progress. And I certainly think we're seeing, even just, over the last few months, as far as I can tell, an acceleration of results where new architectures that have pretty profound differences from transformers, especially as it relates to essentially kind of bringing recurrence, just ways of bringing information forward through time that do not depend on this super finite attention window. That seems to be where a huge frontier is. And that's such a weakness of the current systems, that they have these very brittle kind of finite memories that alone, seems like it could really change how the AIs of 2025, look compared to and behave compared to the ones of today. On the pure reason side, who knows what will happen there? I'm old enough to remember when the thought was we're going to get these hyper rational agents, that are going to, never make mistakes, and that's going to be really powerful but problematic, whatever. That doesn't seem to be so much the kinds of things that we're getting. But then you look also at some of the the fundamental research that hasn't quite hit the deployment phase yet. And you do see some like proto agents that look like they, may also have a real role to play in the future. So I do think those are, again, both like there's a lot there for both of them. But even then I would be like, yeah, it still feels like it's a little small. This is what has attracted me so much to your work. I'm always kind of like, but how is the world going to change in response? There's so many, all of, everything we've talked about so far kind of tries to look at the AI largely in isolation, and figure out like, what is it? What does it do? Can we look at the internals? Can we, change around how it works internally? Can we detect what's going on inside? Whatever. And very little of the work that I see gets into what are the dynamics going to look like as things get deployed. And that is at least that's one of, not the only, but that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about the line that you are taking on this. So with that setup, tell us about your kind of third way to approaching the understanding of AIs that don't yet exist.
Yeah. So like, first I'm going to do sort of the very broad framing, and then we can get into some of the more details. So like what concretely this might produce in terms of research. I think the very broad framing on like this broad epistemic approach is something like kind of the premise or the underlying assumption that like maybe intelligent behavior as like a phenomena in the world is governed to some extent by the same or similar principles, irrespective of like what system or specific substrate or specific scale it's implemented in. And if this assumption is true, at least to some extent, then it sort of warrants the idea that like, oh, like, can we go look at currently existing systems that implement intelligent behavior in the wild that we can epistemically access, and can like insights about how intelligent behavior is like implemented in the wild, can that help us inspire or actually just transfer insights to the like AI question specifically. So that's, and obviously that's like a very broad space, right? Like here I'm talking about intelligent behavior being like implemented in the brain. So that's sort of a very standard example. I'm talking about like in sort of biological systems, whether that's like in an evolutionary sense, in an ecological sense, in the sense of like, what do my cells do compared to like my entire body, and how do like they scale up into tissue and into sort of like this like larger organism. And I'm also talking to some extent about social systems, right? Like several human agents, economic agents interacting with each other, producing sort of complex, sophisticated behavioral dynamics that, again, we can like look at from this intelligent behavior perspective and like ask, like, are there parallels? Are there like insights we can use from there?
Is there a definition of intelligence that you could extract from that? Because, it's really interesting. I feel like I'm somewhat intelligent. I feel like cells, typically people don't think of as being intelligent, but then you look at some, video of an amoeba running around and it's like clearly doing something, pretty sophisticated. And I don't think people usually think of like the economy as necessarily being, I think we maybe just kind of couple the notion of intelligence to like our subjective experience, but you're obviously working with a somewhat broader definition. Do you have a definition of intelligence that you use?
I'm definitely working with a broader notion of intelligent behavior here. And I think in particular, I'm like, in general, I'm coming at it less from a place where I'm like, oh, I like know what the definition is and this is the definition, this is what I mean by it. And more like, cool, so there's definitely stuff going on in the world that's like complex and sophisticated and doing things. And like some of it looks quite like intelligence as I would naturally think of, some a bit less, but like, what is the difference between these things really? Is there a bright line? Insofar there isn't, like, what just really is going on under the hood? And maybe with the sort of like aspiration of like hopefully or possibly finding what I often refer to as sort of like a naturalized account of like intelligent behavior. So like I'm like interested in, like how is this implemented, right? Like insofar as I'm as a human can be described as doing intelligent behavior, like what is it that I'm doing? And then how is this similar or different from what other systems are doing? And I'm like not trying to say all these systems are doing this exactly the same thing or intelligent in the same way, but I am interested in similarities and dissimilarities of like just the dynamics they're implementing. And it seems like a lot of these systems are able to do what we might describe as like systematic work. Like an economy is able to some extent to like allocate resources efficiently. Like that's like, if you would give me the task to do that, I would have to like think really hard and would be pretty bad at it. Like there's sort of work involved, and like an organism sort of like developing from like a single cell into like a fully developed organism, like has to figure out which parts have to go where, and like, you know, like what proteins to produce, etc. So like that's, you know, like that is something. There's like work happening. How is this how is this actually happening? And is there like shared principles to how this occurs?
Sometimes I just think of like inputs and outputs. You know, that's kind of how I always have a habit when I'm talking to somebody who's developed, you know, whether it's a new research product or a project or a commercial product or whatever. I try to ground the discussion a lot of times and just saying like, okay, you've made some AI thing. What are the inputs and what are the outputs? And, you know, then we can kind of get into how it's doing that transformation. Maybe that's one, you know, kind of not too presumptuous way of thinking about, you know, there's something in the middle between inputs and outputs that seems to be doing some like, you know, not always predictable, but, you know, useful for some purpose transformation of these inputs to outputs, whether it be, you know, outputs obviously can be like behaviors or literal, literal products. But I like the way you kind of resist some of these labels or, you know, familiar terms that people, you know, just kind of use perhaps without fully, you know, grappling with what they contain or what they imply.
And maybe if I could just like motivate that a bit more, like I think this is quite crucial to do insofar as like the very thing we're confused about is like, what sort of thing will future AI even be? Like what sort of like process will this instantiate? And if we start with like, you know, pretty like anthropomorphic concepts to start with, like I'm just not particularly confident that this will be like it might turn out right, but like I would like to be right for the right reasons, right, and not by luck. And I think there's some arguments just coming from a place of sort of like, cool, like our minds have evolved in an evolutionary context that like make me good at noticing phenomena at a certain scale, temporal and spatial scale, but not at a different one. Like there's like phenomena that happen at much slower time scale that they're just not, you know, they don't get propagated into my attention, or at much faster scales, and I can't see them. And I think if we have them, like, and I think so that there's sort of like anthropomorphism creeping in here, like there's some things my mind is trained to see and be able to understand or like notice. And yeah, like what if an AI system will be sufficiently alien or instantiate sufficiently alien behavior that I won't by default see it. I like will actually need to like enhance my ability to like sense the world around me with these sort of scientific theories or like ways of measuring things that will allow me to like see beyond my sort of like evolutionary prime sort of spatial and temporal scales.
Yeah, it's quite a high wire act, really. I find, you know, for myself, I've definitely put myself into mostly the first camp to date, right? In the three buckets that we've used here. The first one being based on the assumption that future systems will look like current systems. I'm not always necessarily fully conscious of that, but I guess I'm also just trying to wrestle sometimes with what are the current systems and what can they do, you know, before even trying to get into the future. And in that line of work, I really try to avoid analogies. And, you know, because I find often, and, you know, again, I have the benefit of mostly focusing on currently existing systems that I can actually bring, you know, the normal procedures of experimentation and science to, not always with full access to the weights, of course, but, you know, with at least some access to things that really exist. And I find more often than not, when people try to make analogies or use metaphors, that ends up confusing the situation more than it helps. But again, with this problem of epistemic access, where you're really specifically saying, I want to try to figure out, you know, what the future might look like, and I'm not, you know, going to assume that it's going to look like the present in these particular ways, then you sort of have no choice but to make some leap. So I think that's why I say it's a high wire act, because you're really challenged to figure out what parts of current ways of thinking are useful, and at what point do we maybe cross over into diluting ourselves or confusing ourselves. You can maybe just unpack that at a conceptual level more, and then I definitely want to get into some of the particulars, because your big project is essentially recruiting talent from different backgrounds and starting to refocus their energy on the study of AI. And it's been cool to see how many different types of people you've been able to attract already.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power. So how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/cognitive. That's oracle.com/cognitive. Oracle.com/cognitive. If you're a startup founder or executive running a growing business, you know that as you scale, your systems break down and the cracks start to show. If this resonates with you, there are 3 numbers you need to know: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000. That's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamline accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind, so you get a customized solution for all your KPIs in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need all in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist, designed to give you consistently excellent performance, absolutely free, at netsuite.com/cognitive. That's netsuite.com/cognitive to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/cognitive.
Let me just give one more sort of clarification, where I think so far we've framed the epistemic approach quite sort of centrally around what will future systems look like. And I think this is an important motivator, but I also want to make some argument about how I think it is very important to look at current systems, and actually how some of these approaches are also meant to provide productive insight into current systems. There might be several ways this might happen, right? This might either happen by, one sort of more mundane example might be, hey, neuroscience has several decades of attempts behind itself trying to figure out what's happening in the brain. What methodologies have been developed, what methodologies have been shown to work more or less well. Are any of those importable to AI interpretability, ML interpretability? And so we had some fellows in the past basically just making that translation, but that translation, happening to is going towards trying to understand current systems, but taking inspiration from how we have studied intelligent behavior in other types of systems. And yet another example might just be, cool, yes, we will want to look at current ML systems, but what are different frames or theories or models through which to conceptualize ML systems, right? And yes, there is a low-level matrix multiplication thing going on, but what are other things, right? Active inference, FEP, free energy principle minimization frames might be one example here of it's trying, it's self-conceiving as being a theory of cognition. Is this a productive frame to use to look at state-of-the-art ML systems? And if so, what does it suggest about their behavior, how they will scale, right? What they will do if they come into touch with the world around them. So yeah, I just want to sort of clarify, it's not just about future systems that don't exist yet, but maybe also what are useful frames to understand currently existing systems.
And also even, between those two, there's the question of, as current systems get more broadly deployed and begin to kind of shape the environment, then you've got all kinds of dynamics, that I think are very much not yet in existence, but probably more predictable. And I think that's also a really interesting middle ground that your work touches on in various ways. So when we were preparing for this, I had organized my thinking and the way that I was going to approach the questions around the different fields. There are different, kind of academic backgrounds that people might be coming from. And I used the term borrowing, and I was kind of inspired a little bit by Tyler Cowen, who's, always going around saying, where are the models? We nobody has written down an explicit model of like what's going to happen, what's going to go wrong. And now there's starting to be a little bit of that. And I think you're, again, building the field that's going to bring more of that. But you challenged my thinking there a little bit and said like, okay, first of all, borrowing, if I understand it correctly, you're kind of saying borrowing is often a little too narrow. It sort of suggests that there's like a key idea from a particular field that we can just kind of quickly snap over. And it's unfortunately not usually that simple. I guess in the analogy frame would be like assuming a tighter analogy than in fact exists. So tell me how you prefer to think about the move from, one kind of background to studying AI.
It's really, really multifaceted, right? Like I was thinking a bit about it, and I don't have like one single answer to like, this is the thing that happens or something. Like actually a bunch of different things can happen. But it can try, like there's a few different things I can give examples of, right? So like, I think this can range from, very simple, like there's some facts about the world that might be interesting, right? Like size of mammalian brains, like that can be a fact that sort of informs some of our priors around thinking about or forecasting around AI. Or like that might be a fact that we take from one discipline towards that's helpful, but it's sort of kind of small scale. And I think from there we can really extend to like theoretical frameworks, models that live at like different levels of abstraction, and for each of which we can sort of ask, is this a productive way of like asking this specific question in AI alignment? Whether you're like, hey, should we use like game theoretic frames to think about what are the strategic implications if like several AI agents interact with each other? Can we like, borrow like principal agent concept from economics to like conceptualize what we mean by the alignment problem? Can we use methodology, so like sort of mathematical often methodology, say from like the complex systems to like model complex interactions? The example I gave before, right? Like what methodologies exist in the neurosciences that have been used to like try to understand what's happening in these like highly connected networks. So yeah, we play with model theories, concepts, with methodologies, and then I think there's also something like slightly more meta, like epistemic practices. So like I've been recently reading up on something that I've been finding quite inspiring. This sort of philosophy of science, history of science work on the field of bioengineering. And I feel like it's a pretty productive sort of metaphor or example case study for some work in AI alignment. Where I guess like the main idea here is something like in bioengineering, right? You have on the one hand, you have sort of like high level theoretical work on like, like how different organisms, how cells work, what is happening within a body. And then on the engineering side, you're interested in like being able to do specific things with your knowledge, right? Like control specific things, like create specific products that help us to do something specific that we have in mind. And bioengineering is sort of like the combination of this two, right? Like how can the theory help us produce the sort of like pharmaceutics or something that like do what we want them to do? And what you see in bioengineering is that you have to like real world organism is really complex, really high detail, and also sometimes it may be like unethical to just like, fiddle around with it. So like you rely a lot on building sort of like simulations or models, which you build specified by your understanding of the theory, and on which you then do sort of a bunch of engineering work, and then sort of only occasionally go like into the like actual organism and like see whether like this worked out. And I think this like conversation between applied and theory that we can like study in this like case of bioengineering, for example, is a pretty apt metaphor as well for like, I think some of the like AI alignment or AI safety work that I'm most excited about, where like I want there to be applied work that like actually has like a concrete bet at like helping us make these systems safer. But I also want that work to be like well-informed and sort of conceptually rigorous. Like we're using a lot of terms from intelligence to agency to goal-directedness to deception that are like really vague. And in order for you to like come up with an experiment that like actually, you know, whether the results that you get are actually what you like think they are or something, like to get results that you can actually trust, we need for these experiments to be like well motivated and conceptually well grounded. And I think that's like sort of where this like theory and applied work comes together. And so yeah, that might just be a third example where it's more like, what was the practice of different fields that help us, you know, do different types of interdisciplinary work in AI safety?
If I understand your approach correctly, I guess there's the sort of intellectual level of the approach and then the, you know, practical approach. Instead of saying, hey, AI is a big deal and we need, you know, a lot of people to think about it, let's go get some people from here and there and, you know, try to assemble them. It seems like you're starting with questions that you think are important about the future of the AI timeline, and then working from those out to go figure out, okay, well, what are the best, most applicable, you know, most likely to produce useful insight fields, I guess is a word, you know, ways of thinking, you know, methodologies, perhaps is a better term, that we could try to pull in. So do you want to kind of run down some of the top questions that you've been focused on? And then you can like, for each one, you can kind of unpack like, you know, I guess, first of all, you know, why do you think that's important? And then, you know, where have you gone to find people who might have the right tool set to bring to bear? And then this is probably a good time also to mention, like, you are actually doing this, like you're bringing people together. This is what PIBBS is, right? It's a program that actually helps facilitate people making this sort of leap. So you can also get into specific individuals if you want, and like projects that they've done that kind of show, you know, some of the early fruits of this approach.
Cool. So I'm going to go through sort of different clusters, which is like partially how I'm thinking about this. I guess like one cluster that is quite fundamental is something like, just in sort of quite fundamental terms, understanding what is intelligent behavior, what is like agentic goal-directed behavior, what is autonomous behavior, which is relevant because part of the premise is that we might be coming to like instantiate these types of behaviors artificially. And of course, if you like get really powerful agentic or autonomous behavior, well, that might be dangerous if you don't understand it well. So like, but then also at the same time, right, like these terms are really fuzzy. What do we even mean by them? Can we actually do science on them? Like, can we have like some sort of grounded mechanistic understanding of what's going on here? How do these behaviors come about? And also what's the logic of how they work? And like, so that is a big cluster. And just like some examples, I guess, to invoke here, I think I'd say there's an entire cluster on sort of like complex systems, which itself is like a very diverse cross-disciplinary field, but like various methods in complex systems that are, I think, essentially trying to ask, right, like, how do we get agents out of atoms, right? Like at some point we just had a world full of atoms and they seem kind of easy to understand. And then at some later point we had a bunch of agents doing things. What's going on? So I think these are examples. And then like a bit more concretely, like I guess like recently we've been talking more with people from the field of artificial life, which like, you know, has like, this can be sort of more applied mathematical work. This can be more like simulation-based work, but a field that is like essentially asking like, what is agency? How does it come about? Can we like implement it? Can we understand? Can we like thoroughly understand how it works such that we could come to implement it? What does that field has to offer to AI alignment? Insofar as like a lot of the risk phenomena we would be worried about have to do with these like complex, sophisticated behaviors. But then I think another way of going about this would be sort of more from the biological angle, right? So like biological systems have developed these behaviors. There is more and more fields like trying to bridge maybe this like biological cognitive angle, where like, well, how do biological systems come to exhibit these like cognitive tendencies. So I've mentioned active inference earlier. There's sort of like basal cognition type work that is trying to ask, right, out of these like very simple systems, how do these sort of get complexified and hierarchically scaled up such that that they eventually exhibit these very complex, sophisticated behaviors. And then also from sort of the social sciences, like an example here might be there's a long-standing question in the social sciences asking, or in sociology asking, like sort of the agency versus structure debate, right? Like if you're trying to explain social phenomena, when should you explain them in terms of like individual human agents taking action, and when should you explain them in terms of like higher level structures having like causal force? And there's just sort of like, this is essentially in the end the question of causality, right? Like, does the market do things? Do like political institutions do things? Or is it at the end of the day always human individuals? There's like a philosophical question here, and there's to some extent also sort of like a mathematical question of like, how do you model this? And where do emergent causality, emergent phenomena trying to understand this? Yeah, so yeah, that's sort of like, that's definitely a field where like a cluster where like a lot of different fields I think have potentially productive insights. Yeah, understanding like how sort of multi-scale systems work. And I guess like maybe one other example if in here would be something like, how are these complex systems structured? So there's like in biology, we see a lot of examples of modularity. So you have like modularity brains developing, like modularity in other examples. So this seems to be something that evolutionary gets selected for. You also see that to some extent in social systems. So like there's some work asking, where do like the boundaries of firms come from? Like why do firms have boundaries in this way and not some other way? Why are we not just like contracting everyone? Like that's weird. And like what are the answers to that? Which I think is like in some sense looking at a similar thing, like how does structuration and individuation happen in different systems?
Are there any like examples of projects that you have brought people together to do within that cluster?
They're all quite detail heavy. So like how to best talk about them. So like maybe one example would be someone sort of like coming in with the premise of like, like there was a time when we were really confused about what temperature was, and we weren't sure whether temperature was a thing or whether there were several things going on, or like, and eventually we came to be able to like measure temperature and like have a sense for like what that phenomena is. And like, what if the same is true for agency? Like what if like agency is actually a thing, agency, agentic behavior, like what if that's a thing that could be measured across systems if just we understood it properly? And then going into like often sort of like physics inspired questions, right? Like what would it mean to come up with a solid measure of agentic behavior? There might be one angle. There's another line of work that I'm interested in, which is sort of like related to hierarchical agency or like hierarchical alignment. So like it seems like we see in a lot of systems in the wild that they actually have this hierarchical structure where there's maybe like to some extent agentic behavior happening at different levels of abstraction. And you might wonder what level of abstraction is the one you should be looking at, or like what's the relationship between these levels of abstraction. So like one example here might be, there's like individual cells, there's like tissues in my body, and then there's me overall. And all of this have like, depending on what frame I take, like some claim to be like, this is like a relevant level of abstraction to look at. In particular, like usually my cells kind of like are nicely aligned with what I want to do. But like occasionally you get things like cancer, where there's like individual cells sort of getting like informationally decoupled from the overall systems, and then like starting to kind of like act against the goal of the higher level system. So that might be an example here of like a hierarchical like misalignment. And then you can start to ask, right, like how in the first place do you scale up these levels of interactions or shit to like get something coherent at the higher levels? And then also what are ways that like the alignment gets kept in place or breaks? And obviously you like see this in other places, right? You can look at the economy and be like, there's individual economic agents, there's like, high level abstractions that like usually in economics we think a lot about high level abstractions like organizations, etc. So that's a line of work. which you can tackle both conceptually, both from the like biological angle of like how does this happen in biology, and from the like math complex systems angle, like how do we even model this sort of phenomena.
Is it too soon to ask if there are any insights that are simple enough to impart to people?
Yeah, I think like very clear like results are like struggle just like in simple terms pointing at them. I do think this is like a frame on even like formulating what we might mean by AI safety or AI alignment that I think is a productive frame among other ones. So like if some people are maybe familiar with this, like some of the arguments for like why AI risk might be concerned, for example, what is called inner optimizers or mesa optimization. So like you sort of a dynamic where you have like an outer sort of optimization process, but that's sort of spinning off like an inner optimization process that can come to have goals that are like misaligned from each other. Sort of a simple example of this might be potentially sort of like evolution overall trying to optimize inclusive fitness, and then like that's spinning out an agent like humans or a species like humans that have goals on their own. So like that would be like a simple example with some nuance neglected here. But that seems to be like an example of a hierarchical thing in a similar way I've described it before happening. So like getting an answer to like what are the like keys to alignment between hierarchical like levels will potentially be productive here. Or like I guess another frame on this could be something like we have developed in end of the 20th century like language to talk about the strategic implications of multiple agents interacting with each other at the same level of interaction, which is game theory, which we can now use to like talk about what is happening in different situations where we get multiple agents interacting. What would something like vertical game theory look like here? Like what can we come to say something principled is about? What are the strategic causal interactions between agents at different levels of abstraction? Can we have like a mathematical framework that allows us to think about this more productively?
So this is all under the cluster of questions around like, where does agency come from? Is it something that we could potentially have a quantity measure for? Is it, inherently hierarchical or whatever? And then if you were to take this same question of like AI agents to somebody who is an application developer, they would say, well, I know what an AI agent is. It's a language model that I give a goal and put in a loop and kind of allow it to take a step and then get some feedback from the environment and then just have it take another step. And I just kind of keep looping until, I either hit my goal or I like get stuck long enough that I abort. And I guess I wonder like, how do you develop an intuition for which assumptions or, which sort of, where are the valid analogies and where are the invalid analogies? I also look at a transformer and I'm like, in some sense, you could say this is hierarchical, but in other ways, it's like kind of one directional and, it's certainly not that much like the hierarchy of like our bodies, right? Where there's sort of these clearly different like scales, and it seems like the higher level scales largely can control or direct, but also take feedback from the lower. It doesn't seem like that kind of stuff is going on in a transformer. Maybe it is, and we just can't, see it, or it's happening in some sort of weird smushed, smeared out way over the course of the forward pass. But all these questions are so interesting. And then I'm still at the end, I'm like, how do I know how much of this I should believe? How would you kind of coach me in developing my sense for that?
The whole point about analogies or sort of proxies is that no single analogy or proxy is true. Like that's what we mean when we say analogy or proxy. Like instead, I think the thing to go for is that when we're very confused about a phenomenon, we have sort of limited immediate access to it. And it's like, the territory is very detailed and we only have maps to try to think about it. And they're never perfect. Instead of being like, what's the perfect map that will give me all the answers I want? What I'm interested in is something one might describe as like a sense of like epistemic pluralism, where if I get a bunch of different proxies or different maps, different perspectives on the same phenomena, I can sort of triangulate between them And then I can come to form what are hopefully more robust guesses about what actually holds about this system. So the more sort of like independent from each other perspectives I have on this thing, but like say all of the perspectives do suggest that like feature A is something, and like only one of those perspectives says feature B is also something, I have more confidence that feature 1 is in fact a thing. And because I think we sort of like lack the sort of like, this is the one true map for understanding this phenomena, the sort of like pluralistic perspective and seeking for sort of like epistemic robustness through plural perspectives is what I'm after. So that's one chance, right? Like you should always be suspicious of the analogies and proxies you use. But if you use a bunch of them and they sort of like converge or sort of agree on some aspect, you should be more confident about those aspects than about others. So that's one. And then I guess there's like another thing to say here, which is like, there's very different types of analogies, right? It could be like, well, we can like loosely talk about, in what ways is like a language model like a human, and sort of like speculate about that. And then there's like another way in which I'm like, we could like have some sort of mathematical model and be like, how would we like describe this phenomena in question through this mathematical model? Different levels of precision, different sort of epistemic statuses to both of these things. One, the former may be like more geared towards inspiring new hypotheses, which is like a valid thing to do, but like you're just generating hypotheses at this point. And another may be more geared towards like falsifying whether like a specific hypothesis is productive or not.
Maybe another way, as I'm trying to put this into my own words, another way I might frame it is a lot of this work kind of takes the form of if this, then that. And we don't know what value of this is going to pertain at various points in the future. But by like doing a bunch of if this, then that sort of work, we can hopefully be more prepared and be ready as new things start to emerge and say, okay, what is this? And hopefully have a bunch of ready analysis for a bunch of different, possible thises that we may encounter. So, better to go push all those frontiers in advance, even not knowing which one will actually pertain. But it then just becomes really important to get clear on like, what are the assumptions, and what would we need to see in a future AI system to have confidence that this way of thinking about it is going to be productive.
That's right. And like, maybe giving a bit more, like one slightly more applied example still. Like I am definitely on the more concrete end, one of the things I'm most hopeful about is this sort of theory being able to like productively inform both interpretability and sort of like evaluations type work. So like in evaluations type work, what you're doing essentially is be like, okay, here is a risk phenomena. Here is like some sort of dynamic this AI systems could produce that we would be worried about. Can we find it in the AI system? And for that to like happen in a way that I would be somewhat confident it actually succeeded, you need to have a good characterization of what we mean. And if you're like trying to look for, does the system, act autonomously, pursue goals over like long horizons, is deceptive, like you need to have like a good account of what you mean by deception. And it's actually pretty fraught. It's actually pretty hard to like specify what we mean there. So I think that's like, can we come up with frames, accounts here that can help us do evaluation work better? And the other similar application is something like in interpretability, you also to some extent, you can do very bottom-up interpretability and just be like, what do I find? But you can also be like, what am I even looking for, right? Like, am I looking for planning? Okay, cool. Like, what would that even look like? And these questions, it's just like, gets hard and having sort of like an epistemically plural way of informing how to interpret what you're finding seems productive. And I think that's like at the more like applied side of the spectrum.
So you want to move on to some other clusters of questions?
Yeah, I guess an important other cluster, it's in a similar way of just like pretty fundamental trying to understand what we're dealing with, but like a bit more focused on like, I guess like minds and cognition in general. What I have in mind here is like most of the like brain sciences, right? Like neuroscience, cognitive sciences, and then to some extent, I guess, like philosophy of mind, comparative studies between like animal human cognition, right? Like how is like cognition evolved evolutionarily? There's like some work on this. Can this inform our understanding of what we even mean by like doing higher level cognition? Such that again, we have sort of a grounded way of thinking about this, or a more grounded way of thinking about this in the AI case. This can then go to different places, right? From, I've mostly mentioned applications for interpretability. How do humans come to be pretty good at deductive reasoning and arithmetics? How is this similar and different from like transformers? What about the ways in which transformers are brittle, like, or kind of brittle in this way? Should we just expect they're like stop being brittle in this entirely? Because like human brains also are just big connectomes. What's going on here? Where do motivations come from, right? Like, where do intrinsic motivations come from? Could we understand this process well enough to just engineer motivations into systems that then sort of are reliable? Or like, what are the limitations to that? How does theory of mind work, right? Like, higher order animals all seem to have this capacity to like model other agents. That's kind of a wild thing. AI systems with theory of mind, we're getting into sort of like maybe higher order capabilities around deception or situational awareness. Like, what's that like? Again, human minds seem to do a lot of this. What is it? How do we identify it? How might it come about in AI systems? There's also some work happening. Steve Rhines is like working on like brain-inspired like alignment proposals, right? Like taking this like brain analogy really seriously and being like, what would it now look like to like actually make AI systems safe based on that? So like not just interpretability, but safety proposals. So that might be another application. Another cluster, and you've actually alluded to this several times, so I'm like glad I can actually and finally mention it as well. I think there's something really important about multiple agents interacting. Definitely classically, the AI risk discourse has focused a lot on like the way a single advanced AI systems could be pretty harmful. And I think this is like relevant in many ways. But I also think there's like important reasons to expect that what we will see in coming years is a bunch of different AI systems interacting with each other, or AI systems interacting with a bunch of humans. Can we come to understand what's going to happen here in a more principled way? One frame on this I kind of like is something like, interpretability basically is like trying to look into the system and understand based on its internals, what does it do, how does it behave, and why. What I want is kind of like interpretability, but for interacting agents. And I think we're currently extremely far away from that. We're currently even like, this is like so we had some fellows last summer working on this, and I was very excited about this, but it's also very evident how sort of pre-paradigmatic we are, right? Like, it's already hard to study complex interactions because in order to make it more tractable, you need to simplify, and then you need to be like, am I simplifying away something that's important to understand what's actually going on? So that's already hard. But then now in the AI case, you're trying to model how different AI systems interact, but like we're not even sure, like what we mean by AI systems, right? Do we mean LLMs? Okay, cool. Like we can put in GPT-4 and be like, how does GPT-4 interaction with each other, with like several instances of each other work out? Or like different like characters within the same language model, or different like architecture for AI agents, right? Like we're even confused about what even AI, what we mean by AI, what sort of mind is it? We're like very low, like very weak theory on how even to like understand its behavior. Where if we model humans interacting with each other, we're also very complex. But I think sort of our like full psychological assumptions about how we might interact with each other, while sometimes problematic, we still have better reasons to expect that they are sometimes valid. But our intuitive assumptions about AI systems and language models, I think they're just like even more flawed and even more likely to be unjustified. So like, I think it is really hard to make the progress on this, but there's various reasons why there might be a lot of risks just coming from the emergent dynamics between interacting models. And like some work has been done on characterizing the risk from this. So yeah, can we, either like use game theoretic models? Can we use like something like ecology, right? Ecology is interested in different types of species interacting over a set of resources. What are the dynamics? What are the reproductive dynamics, etc.? So that could be a frame, or obviously like economic frames are looking into this.
I don't know a lot about this, but I've always kind of thought that ecology seems like a really good frame of reference, just because the different forms of life are very different, and whatever ecology is doing, it is at least forced to find some way of integrating into some, single account that all these different things. And I mean, you think like, good God, you've got an octopus and a human and an elephant, and, and that's not even that far flung in terms of how different things can be. And so maybe, you could kind of fit pretty weird AIs into those frames as well. I know you have had some folks who have come to the PIBBSS program from ecology type backgrounds. Any kind of, again, like results or sort of frames that they have developed that you think have been, useful for developing your own intuitions for what might happen in the future?
It's definitely early days, and I think there's not that many examples of what we've had so far. So like I have one good friend who's starting a PhD in ecology, who's like interested in ASF. So I'm like kind of interested in that. And I think I've gained some insights from that. And then we had some fellows last summer coming from a sort of evolutionary and ecological perspective. So I think those people have mostly been working on like, okay, can we even come to find good like experimental setups that we then can eventually run and give us good insights. But like one of the main high level insights is like, it's really hard to like come to make good choices here, right? Like if you let LLM systems interact, what's the analogy here for like the environment, right? Like what are the resources what's the space, like in typical ecological models, you often think about space, right? And like you want to have like control over different space, control over different resources. What's the analogy here in like textual space? What are we trading off? What are they like coordinating over? How do you run these experiments? It's just all very early days. I think another metro level insight here is something like a challenge to translation here is that, I mean, I think this is definitely coming, but traditionally, I think ecology still is very, informed by going into the field and being like looking at the actual animals interacting and what's happening there. And I think this is like not very apt for what we're trying to do here. So we're sort of more talking about a sort of computational ecology type direction, and that doesn't really exist. And I think it needs sort of like bold individuals with like who happen to find the freedom in their academic context to be like, hey, like I want to combine these insights from ecology with these questions in physics and math and AI and computer science. And then you need a supervisor or a faculty or so that's like, okay, you should do that. So like that's not a given. Yeah, a string here that is like a bit theoretical, but I think that I'm interested in is specifically better understanding meta-evolutionary dynamics. So like I think we have like people in general have a pretty good sense for like evolution and like what sort of like pressures evolution creates and what that predicts about, or like how that shapes our expectations for, how different systems get shaped. But there is, even in the field of biological evolution, sort of like a lot of still open and unclear work on like, are evolutionary pressures themselves subject to change, and under what logic, and what does that mean for then the organism or the like evolution of the organisms? And is that relevant to understanding future minds, or to understanding like the sort of pressures that act on what motivations and type of behavior we will see emerge from AI systems? I think this is conceptually very interesting, but also still on the conceptual side and not very applied yet.
What kind of techniques are you seeing people explore? I can imagine word-based analysis, just like a language level. I can imagine pure math, kind of pure analysis. And I can imagine simulation, I guess, just to name three. What sorts of approaches are you seeing people take, and what seems to be kind of most fruitful so far?
I've seen some early examples of all of these. They all seem potentially relevant. I think it's hard. So like textual analysis, right? Like let different instances of LLMs interact with each other in prompt them in some way iteratively and see how, this the sort of thing they answer evolves. That is, a thing to look at, and you in principle seem like you could get at what are the dynamics of interaction that come out of this. But I definitely have not so far seen an experimental setup here that has given me much new, Bayesian evidence towards something being true versus not. So I think I'm conceptualizing this mostly as this seems clearly work that's warranted. This seems clearly something we need to look into, but we're not really at a place at the moment where I'm seeing results that really make me update drastically. Mathematical modeling, most, I guess, of what I've seen is something like formalizing what it would even look like to use a specific model on AI interactions, or on modeling AI systems through that, and then sort of discussion about how you would apply it and what are maybe the confusions or shortcomings of that. And that again seems productive, and I feel excited about it. Not very concrete things to point at in terms of results. Simulation, yeah. I think this is one of the directions I'm pretty excited about, specifically to start to inform evaluations. I think a lot of this is about how do we design experimental setups for current or state-of-the-art ML systems to with any meaningful confidence derive, are they capable of X? Are they not capable of X? Under what conditions are they? What sort of capabilities can you elicit from them when they start to interact, not just in some artificial sandbox, but with lots of environmental affordance from the wider world? How much do their capabilities shift when deployed in the wide world that has a lot of detail and affordances that they might not have? So what would it look like to have a good environmental setup, experimental setup to elicit this? That's something I think on the shorter timelines front I'm most excited about. Work is in progress there. I mean, from sort of evaluations group Archival, trying to see whether these models can reliably self-replicate, right? Testing this, to trying to what would it look like to test whether an AI system evolves something like situational awareness. I'm kind of excited about someone working with us who's I think has sort of early stages of the theory of how we might conceptualize situational awareness sort of mathematically, such that can then inform what sort of experiment would you have to design to plausibly elicit this phenomena in AI systems.
Are there any historical moments that you think we could learn anything from in terms of just other times in history where we were confronted by something very new and had to kind of figure out, or were challenged to figure out what it might imply? I mean, there's a lot of analogies that people make between AI and the Industrial Revolution, and I call this show the Cognitive Revolution, kind of on that basis. But I don't really know much about. My sense is that our track record isn't great. If you looked at the predictions from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, hopefully we have better tools now, and better frames to bring to it. But are there any historical moments where people collectively were able to see around the corner and get a handle on what was to come?
I guess an answer will come in degrees, right? Not particularly. So I guess what I'm interested in here is maybe something I think Industrial Revolution and some other examples, electricity, whatever, seem pretty good examples of transitions of innovation that has shaped society pretty transformatively. And I think there's things to learn from this. A transition that I'm mostly think we haven't faced so far as a society, and which I think is one way of thinking about what we're facing at the moment, is us actually becoming able to artificially instantiate highly complex, intelligent, in the sense of autonomous, goal-seeking behavior, which is in some important senses different from inventing electricity, inventing specific tools. That really forces us to grapple with these very complex phenomena of there's some recursive thing going on where an atom, where a bunch of atoms start to act in some coherent ways over long time horizons, are able to self-maintain and, against dissipative pressures, and sort of like act in such a way that presses through the noise, right? They like seem to like pursue things despite, facing environmental obstacles. Like something really complex is going on here. Something that's like on its own terms able to like shape the world around us. And I don't think we have like meaningfully dealt with this sort of thing. I mean, like, there's like non-human animals around us that have some of these capacities, but our approach here was to control them pretty reliably. And so like not sort of like in a way that they like clearly spin out of control or understanding. So I think that's like a historic, like one way I'm thinking about the current historic moment, or potentially the current historic moment, that I struggle to find analogies to.
Yeah, unfortunately, as I listen to you, my mind goes to like, the Neanderthals didn't necessarily see us coming, and we could even interbreed with them, but still somehow we were different enough that it didn't go so well for them in the grand sweep of history.
And I think a lot of this is about the speed, or like the sort of like the iteration loop. Like if you say like how much time you have to react to this, when things happen really quickly or otherwise in such a way that humans can't like easily understand what's happening around them, our ability to intervene and course correct or shape the trajectory of the development becomes smaller. And I think that's, rather than wanting to say that like, I think what we're like looking at the moment is like qualitatively different. I think what we're looking at the moment is different on a continuum on this dimension, where we are more confused about what we're building. And this is like happening, this development is happening much faster than whatever evolution has produced so far, such that it's just a much more drastic case of something that has been going on to some extent from economic improvements, right? Like industrial revolution has also like sped up a lot of things, but like, and already we were struggling with adapting to what should the institutional framework be for like making sure people are still well under these new conditions. But I think what we're facing is just like this, but much faster, and then potentially also just with this like autonomous dimension. I'm not sure how much civilizational capacity we have to deal with this particularly well.
Yeah, I mean, it's an intimidating challenge, and I commend you for taking it on in such a direct way and in such a unique way. From all the things I've seen, I really think your approach of trying to start with these questions and then go figure out, even if it's not perfect or not even close to perfect, like who might have the best chance at getting traction on these questions. I think that is a really inspired approach, and maybe in the last few minutes, we can kind of talk about like what sort of people you are looking for. You're actively like running this program and bringing people in, but also you have kind of a reading list, which is a place that people can go to like get up to speed on what you deem to be the fundamentals. And obviously this is something that people are going to be increasingly, I think, open to. And, as you mentioned earlier, like if you're a PhD student or whatever, and you need a mentor who can be open-minded enough to encourage you to go in this direction, I think that is probably going to become increasingly common. So I'd love to just, get a little bit more on kind of the very practical, like what sorts of people do you think should get into this? What do they need to do to start to get, to build their foundation, from which they can really start to hopefully make progress? What kinds of people are you specifically looking for, in the program that you're running?
Yeah, just very briefly, a quick outline on like a few different programs we run where like the answer is like very slightly different. So like we have been running for the last 2 years a summer fellowship, which is just a 3-month, summer fellowship, research fellowship program where we pair. And this is like mostly sort of PhD level and sometimes a bit more senior than that with researchers in AI alignment, where the idea is to just match people with expertise in one of these domains in that study complex intelligent behavior, natural systems with AI alignment researchers. This is 3 months, so like not always enough time to like get to really groundbreaking insights, but definitely get to build traction and that mutual surface area between the fields. And then much more recently, we started a new program where we're taking on research affiliates. They tend to be more research experienced, where the aim is really to support them in a more tailored and longer term fashion to just like much more sort of like get them to like pursue their individual personal research agendas. And then we have some sort of more, lower key programs, like we run some speaker events from time to time in the reading group that was curated by TJ, on like, I think a pretty good frame of just like thinking through why is AI alignment hard and not easy, if it is, but like, why don't we not get this right by default? What are the obstacles we're meeting? Why is this hard? So you should to potentially also to some extent characterize like, this is the sort of conceptual obstacles to be overcome if we are meant to get this right. So this is meant to sort of provide some surface area in a way that's hopefully pretty digestible for people from fairly different backgrounds, to just build surface area with like, what are the risk phenomena we are grappling with in AI safety, to then hopefully provide the sort of surface area such that someone with a specific domain expertise can notice, oh, like maybe this approach we're using in my domain, maybe this like these sort of mathematical tools, these like conceptual tools are maybe a productive angle and on tackling one of these risk phenomena. So yeah, going a bit more into, okay, cool, like what is the sort of like talent we're particularly excited about? I think it's like, I guess maybe there's like three things. Like something that seems important is surface area with AI risk, AI safety. What are the sort of obstacles to getting this right? What are the sort of intricacies to where risks come from, or like how maybe safety we can achieve safety? So just like some sort of a surface area with the AI safety discourse seems very useful, among others. And this is maybe the second point to say here is like, this is all pretty early stages, right? There is no good one paradigm telling you this is how to think about it correctly. There are a lot of open questions, a lot of confusions, and especially also in this sort of like knowledge transfer question. I don't have all the answers for like, if you have a background in evolutionary theory, this is what you should work on. Like, I don't have some ideas. Some are more speculative than others, but a lot is really needing to grapple with, what could it be? What seriously could it be? And I think for that, you want to well understand your source domain really well, have like expertise, but also understand what will the useful application actually look like. And yeah, I think in my experience, it just involves both just knowledge, skill, but also some sort of maybe research experience, or just like willingness to dive into fairly open-ended questions. I think I'm also at the margin particularly excited about people who are willing to, even if they don't come from like an ML engineering end, to try to really tie in their domain experience with like, cool, like how could this inform concrete applied work, either conceptually, in terms of experimental design, in terms of evaluation and interpretability. I think this edge of like really tying theory up with applied is a really difficult one, and what I'm particularly excited in trying to foster. But yeah, that is neither to undermine the like value of theory, nor like the importance to like actually do things that have like some concrete application, or like feedback loops in concrete application.
It's going to be a challenge. It sounds like there's certainly a lot more questions than answers, but I guess my pitch to the audience is that the study of AI is also super dynamic, still full of lots of low-hanging fruit, it seems. It's like we're both pre-paradigmatic and still picking the low-hanging fruit at the same time. In terms of impact, the move from a more mature field where you may be refining techniques, to a field of AI where, it is just wide open, I suspect for many people could feel like quite liberating and, an opportunity to really ask big and important questions. Some fields are less affording of certainly as they mature. So I do think this is something, the more we've talked about just how early it all is and how much remains to be done to figure out how to map these different approaches to trying to figure things out onto the AI challenge, the more I'm just like, man, we need more people to look at themselves and say, like, maybe I should be one of those people. So my kind of call to action again is, don't count yourself out just yet. There's nobody, there's no like anointed group right now that is got it under control, or that is going to, that we can say with any confidence is going to, answer the big questions. So pile in and, sign up for perhaps a bit more of an unpredictable and wild ride than you were perhaps first thinking, when you got into a PhD. But know that the sense of adventure, the impact that you can make, the scope of the questions that are on the table to be tackled is just incredible. And, for the right personality, that is super invigorating, and can be a lot of fun, as well as, potentially extremely valuable to society, because this is coming at us pretty quick, it seems. And, again, I just think we need every bit of brain power that we can bring to bear on it. We will definitely need that. Any closing thoughts on your end?
Yeah, there aren't established answers to any of this. And in particular, we don't have established answers to the solutions. And also there's like confusion and room to really clarify how should we best think about the risk. And I think I mean this in a productive sense, like where we neither want to like, maybe all of this is like not worth worrying about, nor, we're going to die in this very specific way. Like, I think productive and plural perspective on like what could go wrong, that seems important, and not over-indexing on one specific way. So I think like both room for pluralism on what different solutions could we find, and also what is the right way of really understanding what is up here, what is on stake, where do the risks come from. Productive, rational disagreement to be had on each side.
Love it. Well, more questions and answers, but again, I invite everybody to join Nora Ammann of PIBBSS and the Alignment of Complex Systems Research Group in jumping in and trying to tackle them. For now, Nora, thank you for being part of the Cognitive Revolution.
Thank you so much.
It is both energizing and enlightening to hear why people listen and learn what they value about the show. So please, don't hesitate to reach out via email at tcr@turpentine.co, or you can DM me on the social media platform of your choice.
Ammann uses generative AI to enable you to launch hundreds of thousands of ad iterations that actually work, customized across all platforms with a click of a button. I believe in Ammann so much that I invested in it, and I recommend you use it too. Use CogRev to get a 10% discount.